It is finished. For God has done what the law, weakened by the flesh, could not do, by sending his Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin, he condemned sin in the flesh. Romans chapter 8, verse 30, the English Standard Version. In the book of Romans, the Apostle Paul has been describing the finished work of Jesus the Christ. He draws back as far as the book of Genesis to track the path of sin and the purpose of the Christ. Through the course of human history, we see how God has been preparing his people for the Christ coming, beginning with the Jews. Through the prophets of old, God made a deliberate effort to prepare the Jews for the greatest incarnation in human history. Yet, the majority of Jews doubted Jesus' divinity. The writer of the book of John explains that they had all the evidence, but chose not to believe. Today, believers have even more information than the initial Jews because they have the biblical evidence of the fulfillment of the prophecies of the Old Testament and the revelation of God's salvific plan for all of humankind. Still, they commemorate the substitutionary death and the triumphant resurrection with such gloom. Holy Week makes the gospel good news, not sad news. For the entire week, believers should celebrate the great love which took Jesus to the cross. If ever believers have cause to be sad, it should be about their continued sin in the face of such an enormous display of love. If believers are upset on Good Friday or the Great Sabbath about the crucifixion, it means that they still do not understand the depth of love they owe to God. God did not count it robbery to empty himself to the point of death, according to Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 through to 8. Notice, the writer of John chapter 19, verse 30 says, "When he had received the drink, Jesus said, 'It is finished.' With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit." This means Jesus went through the agony of his suffering. He endured all the pains of hell. He cried out from the depths and announced his victory. He transitioned into death, not defeat, but triumph. When Jesus said, "It is finished," he suggests that his finished work on the cross brought to an end the long night of his suffering. He came through suffering, and he triumphed in suffering, and has proven to believers that they too can overcome suffering. When Jesus said, "It is finished," he meant that the full course of his obedience through the incarnation has been completed. During the incarnation, Jesus perfectly loved God the Father with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength, and he perfectly loved his neighbor as himself. Jesus was the firstborn who has ever done that. Jesus' perfect life of obedience was now complete, and he was about to lay it down. So he said, "It is finished." He left the perfect example for believers to follow. When Jesus said, "It is finished," he meant the final battle with his enemy, the Satan, has ended. Jesus contended with the Satan through the entire incarnation, during which he suffered significantly. When he said, "It is finished," he disarmed the powers and authorities. He made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross, according to Colossians chapter 2, verse 15. When Jesus went into death, the final battle with the enemy had been won, and life for believers begun. Jesus has demonstrated in the way he handled the Satan how believers ought to deal with evil. When Jesus said, "It is finished," he meant The complete work of his atonement was over. The New Testament is clear that Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. He came to give his life as a ransom for many. So on the cross, he says, "It is finished." He has borne the guilt of believers' sin. He has endured the punishment of believers' hell. The divine wrath has been spent on him. The justice of God has been satisfied. If Jesus said, "It is finished," why do some arm of Christendom seem to punish themselves so much during Holy Week? Holy Week ought to be a reminder of how believers ought to live as they hope for the promised return of Jesus the Christ of their faith, so that they can bask in his glory forever. Lord, help us to be strengthened each year by the remembrance of your finished work rather than the mournful approach it has been given. You said that your incarnation is finished. It is now for us to live in accordance with the example of your incarnation. Help us so to do. Amen. You have been listening to Morning Manna with Reverend Bonnie EBW Smith, Superintendent of the Moravian Church Antigua Conference and Minister of Christian Education. Have a marvelous Monday. God bless you.